The first crack of thunder was not from the sky, but from the mouth of Chief Quackabarima. It echoed through his great hall, a sound of pure fury that made the clay pots on the shelves tremble. "Never!" he roared, his face a mask of stormy anger, his chest heaving beneath his expensive, embroidered agbada. "My only daughter, the jewel of my house, the light of my eyes, will not throw herself into the dirt and poverty with a man who owns nothing but a hammer, an anvil, and the clothes on his back." Efua stood before him, her beautiful, expensive dress trembling with the force of her own fear, but her chin was held high with a defiance he had never seen in her before. "Father, please listen to me. Kojo is a good man. His hands are stained with soot and his brow is always wet with honest sweat. But his heart is clean and his word is as strong as the iron he shapes." The chief slammed his heavy, ornately carved staff onto the polished clay floor with a crack that sounded like a bone breaking. "A strong word does not fill an empty pot. A clean heart does not build a house to keep out the rain. He is nothing, less than nothing. You will marry Chief Appia's son as I have arranged, a man of substance, a man of standing, a man with a future." Tears, hot and bitter as gall, streamed down Efua's face, tracing paths through her smooth skin. "I cannot. My heart, my whole heart, belongs to Kojo. I choose a life with love, even if it is a life without gold." Chief Barima's eyes narrowed to dangerous, furious slits. "Then you choose to be nothing. You are dead to me. The day you walk out that door with him, you are no longer my blood. You are a stranger, a ghost, a memory I will bury." Without a single backward glance at the opulent prison of her father's house, Efua turned and ran, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, fleeing into the raging, tempestuous storm outside, the door slamming shut with a sound of finality. The rain was a cold, punishing whip on Efua's skin, soaking through her fine dress in an instant, plastering her carefully braided hair to her scalp. She clutched a small, sodden cloth bag, her entire world now reduced to a single change of clothes, a few pieces of jewelry her mother had given her before she passed, and a small, worn wooden carving of family that her mother had said would protect her. She did not allow herself to cry, though the sobs threatened to choke her. Suddenly, a figure darted from the side of the great compound, a ghost in the gray sheets of the downpour. It was Amma, her friend since they were babies, her face a mask of panic and despair. "Efua, no. Stop!" Amma cried, her voice shrill over the howling wind, grabbing her arm desperately, her fingers like cold iron. "You cannot do this. He is your father, your only family. Go back. Beg his forgiveness on your knees. This path leads only to suffering and hardship. You will starve out there." Efua's voice was soft but unyielding, a quiet, fierce strength against the roaring tempest. "A home without peace is not a home, Amma. It is a gilded cage, and I will not sing for my supper any longer. I would rather be free and hungry than a well-fed prisoner." She gently but firmly pulled her arm free from her friend's desperate grasp. At that moment, a brilliant, blinding fork of lightning split the sky, illuminating the world in a stark, white flash, and in its sudden, terrifying light, she saw him. Kojo. He stood steadfast at the crossroads, drenched and waiting, his simple, homespun tunic plastered to his strong, broad frame. He held no lantern, offered no shelter from the storm, only the unwavering certainty of his presence, his love a solid rock in her swirling world. Efua ran to him, her feet slipping in the mud. He opened his arms, a sanctuary carved from flesh and bone, and she walked into his embrace, the cold seeping away where their bodies met. Hand in hand, fingers laced tightly together, they turned their backs on Adumisa, on wealth, on a father's wrath, their footprints instantly washed away by the relentless rain as they stepped forward into their uncertain, but shared, new life. At dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the village washed clean and silent, the air smelling of wet earth, crushed leaves, and a profound, uneasy peace. Chief Barima stood before the assembled elders in the main courtyard, his face as hard and unyielding as granite, his fine robes replaced with a simple cloth of mourning. "Let it be known from this day forward," he declared, his voice cold and flat, devoid of all the fire from the night before, "that I, Quokka Barima, have only one child, my son Kofi, who is away in the city furthering his studies. The girl, Efua, is dead to this family. She has chosen the path of shame, disobedience, and disgrace. Her name will not be spoken within these walls again." The elders shifted uncomfortably on their stools, their faces etched with concern and disapproval. Old man Kofi, whose wisdom was as deep and ancient as the river, his beard white as sun-bleached cotton, stepped forward, his walking stick tapping gently on the wet ground. "Chief, a father's anger is a necessary fire. It can warm the home and cook the food, or it can burn the entire house down, leaving nothing but ashes. Do not let pride be the spark that destroys your own lineage. The gods, the ancestors, they do not smile on a man who curses his own flesh and blood, who turns his back on the fruit of his own loins." But Quokka Barima was deaf to the warning, his heart a fortress of wounded pride. He poured a libation of expensive schnapps to his ancestors, but the words he spoke were hollow, echoing in the quiet morning. "I pour this for my true lineage, for those who honor my name and obey my word. I speak no more of the one who is gone, the one who is forgotten." As the golden liquid soaked into the rich, dark earth, a low, ominous, guttural rumble of thunder echoed from a clear, bright blue dawn sky. The chief flinched, but ignored it, turning his stiff back on the worried, mumbling elders and walking alone into his large, echoing, and profoundly, achingly empty house, the silence within feeling heavier than any noise. Life in the small, bustling riverside village of Akim was a world of humble, jarring simplicity that Efua had never known, a stark contrast to the cushioned luxury of her father's compound. Their home was a modest, two-room hut with mud walls that were cool to the touch and a thatched roof of dried elephant grass that sometimes leaked in the very heaviest of rains, leaving small puddles on the packed earth floor. Kojo's forge was a simple, open-sided shelter at the back of the plot, where the fire, contained in a stone hearth, was his most loyal and constant companion, its glow a beacon day and night. From the first pink light of sunrise to the time the evening stars began to pepper. The purple sky, the steady, rhythmic, reassuring clang of his hammer against hot iron was the music of their survival, the heartbeat of their new life. The heat from the forge was intense, a physical wall of warmth. The work was back-breaking and left his muscles aching, but he never complained, his focus absolute. Efua, who had never cooked a meal, drawn water from a well, or swept a floor in her life, learned with quiet, determined grace from the kind, patient village women who took pity on the beautiful, gentle stranger. She learned to weave sturdy, beautiful baskets from reeds dyed with berry juices, which she sold in the bustling, colorful market. Her gentle nature, her ready smile, and her willingness to help others making her quickly beloved by all. Their meals were simple, banku with okra soup, sometimes with just a single, small piece of fish to share, but they ate together at a small, low wooden table, their hands clasped, their laughter a constant, gentle hum that filled the small hut and warmed it more than any fire could. It was a life of hard, physical work and very little luxury, but it was filled with a genuine, shared warmth, a partnership, and a purpose that Chief Barima's cold, gold-filled, silent mansion had never, ever provided. Meanwhile, in Adumisa, Chief Barima's fortunes seemed to be blessed by the gods themselves, a cruel joke that only reinforced his arrogance. His yam farms yielded such impossibly abundant harvests that new, larger barns had to be hastily constructed, their walls bulging with tubers. His cocoa trees were heavy with thick, ripe pods, bringing traders from distant cities with chests full of gleaming, heavy gold coins that he would count with greedy satisfaction. He hosted lavish, extravagant feasts that lasted for 3 days and nights, with musicians playing until their fingers were sore, dancers whirling in a blur of colorful cloth, and endless platters of rich, spiced meats, steaming stews, and sweet, strong palm wine flowing like water. At the height of one such riotous celebration, surrounded by fawning sycophants who praised his greatness and wisdom, he raised a golden, ceremonial cup, his voice booming over the noise. "A toast," he roared, his face flushed with wine and pride. "To wisdom, to good sense, to knowing that love is a poor man's spice, a flavor for fools. It seasons nothing, it fills no hungry belly, it pays no debts, it builds no house. A man needs gold, not affection." The crowd roared with obsequious laughter, raising their own cups, but some of the older, wiser villagers at the edges of the crowd exchanged uneasy, knowing glances, remembering Ephua's kind heart, her soft words, and the sad, lost look in her eyes the day she left. The chief grew richer, fatter, and more isolated, his heart hardening, calcifying with every passing season, every new coin. He saw his ever-increasing wealth as a divine reward, a clear sign from the ancestors that he had been right, absolutely right, to cast out his disobedient, defiant daughter. He did not hear the low whispers that called him the chief with the heart of stone, or the man who sold his daughter for a bag of gold. Whispers that were the first, faint, almost invisible cracks in the very foundation of his towering pride. During the vibrant, noisy, exhilarating festival of masks in Akeem, the air was thick with the primal, throbbing beat of a dozen drums and the joyful, shouting voices of dancers, their bodies painted, their elaborate masks transforming them into spirits and animals. Ephua and Kojo watched from a simple, hand-carved bench at the edge of the crowd, their hands intertwined, their shoulders touching, caught up in the wave of celebration and community. An ancient, blind seeress, her face a roadmap of deep wrinkles, led by a small, serious-faced child, moved slowly, purposefully through the press of the crowd and paused directly before them. Her milky, unseeing eyes seemed to look straight through Kojo into his very soul. She pointed a thin, bony, trembling finger at him. "Young man of the fire," she croaked, her voice like dry leaves scraping against stone, yet it carried over the din. "Your flame is special. It forges more than hoes and cutlasses for the farm. It holds a heat, a spiritual heat, that will one day melt a heart that has turned to cold, hard stone inside a chest of pride and arrogance." Then she turned her head slowly, deliberately toward Ephua, her sightless gaze somehow piercing. "And you, daughter of the rain, child of the storm, your tears have watered a seed deep in the earth, a seed of destiny. You cannot see it yet. Your eyes are too full of present sorrow, but it will grow. It will grow into a great, sheltering tree that will give you shade and fruit when the sun of hardship burns at its very hottest." A sudden, inexplicable, bone-deep chill ran down Ephua's spine, despite the warmth of the crowded night and the heat from the nearby bonfires. The seeress moved on, swallowed by the swirling, dancing figures, leaving behind a cryptic, unsettling prophecy that hung in the smoky air between them, a mysterious puzzle they could not yet solve, a promise and a warning tied together. The seasons turned, the years passed, and a slow, insidious change began to creep over the land, a blight that started subtly but grew with a relentless hunger. The generous, life-giving rains that had always blessed Adumisa, that had made its soil famous, became unreliable, falling in short, angry bursts, then failing completely for weeks, then months. The sun beat down from a hard, white sky with a cruel, relentless, baking heat that made the air shimmer. Chief Barima's vast, once fertile farms began to crack and wither, the green shoots of yam turning brown and brittle, curling in on themselves. His workers, seeing his greed and fearing for their own family's survival in the face of his hoarding, began to steal from the granaries under cover of darkness, carrying away what they could in desperate, secret loads. The great barns, once proud symbols of his boundless wealth and power, now held yams that were soft, mushy, and rotting from the inside out, their sweet smell turning to the stench of decay. The chief raged, storming through his compound, accusing his servants of witchcraft, of treachery, of being in league with his enemies. He spent his dwindling reserves of gold on expensive, traveling medicine men and powerful, feared juju priests, blaming evil spirits, jealous neighbors, and bad luck. He never once looked inward, never considered that the true curse upon his house, the real evil spirit, was the one he himself had spoken aloud, the day he disowned his own child and called down a spiritual death upon her. While Adumasa suffered, choked by dust and despair, the river near, Efua's village, though lower and slower, continued its steady, life-giving flow. Life in Akim was difficult, food was scarce, and bellies were often not full, but the community shared their meager resources, and the honest, unwavering fire of Kojo's forge continued to burn from dawn till dusk, a small but steadfast beacon of resilience, hard work, and hope in a darkening time. One quiet evening, as the fireflies began their delicate dance in the twilight, Efua sat on a low stool outside her hut, patiently mending a torn fishing net with skilled fingers, the rhythm of the task soothing her mind. A familiar, weary, heart-wrenching voice called her name from the shadows at the edge of the compound. She looked up, her heart leaping in her throat, to see Alma, her dearest childhood friend, her face thin, gaunt, and etched with deep lines of fatigue and hunger, her clothes covered in the dust of a long, desperate journey. The two friends fell into a tight, desperate embrace, tears flowing freely, their sobs the only sound in the quiet evening. "Oh, Efua," Alma sobbed, her body shaking. "It is terrible at home. A monster, the famine, is like a great, silent monster eating everything, everyone. Your father, his wealth is all gone, washed away. The people, they're leaving the village, walking nowhere just to find food, anything." Efua's heart clenched with a sharp, familiar, agonizing pain. She pictured the proud, imposing, powerful man she had called father, now broken, destitute, and alone, his pride a hollow shell. "I cannot come back, Alma," Efua whispered, her voice thick with a sorrow that had never fully left her. "He cast me out. He said I was dead to him. His pride, his shame, would be a greater, more terrible pain than his hunger if I had to stand before him now." Kojo, who had been listening quietly from the doorway of his forge, the glow of the embers outlining his strong frame, came and placed a large, strong, soot-blackened hand on his wife's trembling shoulder. "Compassion is the one fire that never burns out, my wife," he said softly, his voice a deep, calm rumble. "It is the one wealth that no famine can steal. We must find a way to help, but we must be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, for a proud man will choke on kindness if it is forced down his throat." The final, devastating, absolute blow for Chief Barima came not with a slow decline, but with a violent, screaming, angry storm that seemed sent by an avenging god. It was not a life-giving rain, but a torrential, punishing deluge. The wind screamed like 1,000 tortured souls, tearing the very thatch from the roofs of his compound, sending the dry grass flying into the black sky like frightened birds. The river, swollen and furious from the sudden, furious downpour, burst its crumbling banks and charged toward his land like an invading, muddy army, consuming everything in its path. He stood helpless, paralyzed at his doorway, a broken, weeping king watching his entire kingdom drown as the churning brown, filthy water surged into his last remaining granary, the one holding his final, desperate hope, the precious, carefully saved seed yams for the next planting season. He watched them, his future, wash away in the filthy, relentless, churning torrent, bobbling like tiny, brown corks before being swallowed by the darkness. When morning finally came, gray and sickly, the devastation was absolute, complete, and utter. His compound was a swamp of stinking mud, splintered wood, and ruined dreams. His last few, loyal servants, seeing nothing left to salvage, no hope of food or payment, gathered their few, pitiful belongings and their silent, wide-eyed families and left without a single word, without a backward glance. The mighty, proud, once wealthy chief Quacabarima was left utterly and completely alone, standing in the cold, sucking mud of the ruins of his pride, surrounded by a silence so profound it seemed to scream of his own folly, his own arrogance, his own self-made destruction. Hunger is a cruel, patient, and relentless teacher, and it began its harsh, unforgiving lessons on the proud chief immediately, stripping him of everything he had left. The man who had once worn the finest, most expensive silks and hand-woven kink cloth now wore tattered, filthy rags that barely covered his shivering body. He walked the dusty, familiar, now hostile paths of Adumisa as a ghost, a specter of his former self, his hand trembling as he held it out to those who had once bowed and scraped and laughed at his jokes. Some, remembering their own humanity, their own shared suffering, would press a moldy crust of bread or a piece of overripe fruit into his hand, their eyes full of a pity that burned him worse than the sun. Others, their own bellies tight and painful with hunger, their children crying through the night, would turn their faces away, their hearts hardened by suffering and a bitter sense of poetic justice. The whispers, which he had once ignored, were now loud, public, and they followed him everywhere, dogging his steps. "Look at the great chief," they muttered, their voices carrying on the dry wind. "The mighty tree has fallen. Not even a shadow remains. Pride goes before a fall, and his was the greatest fall of all. But the chief's heart, though starved and shrunken, had not yet learned humility. It festered with a bitter, poisonous weed of resentment. He cursed the gods for their unfairness, their blindness. He swore vengeance on the fate that had been so unkind to a man of his stature, blind to the stark, simple reality that fate was, in fact, offering him his only chance at true salvation. The very lesson in humanity and humility he had so cruelly forced his own daughter to learn years before. One scorching, airless afternoon, his throat a desert of dust and despair, his legs unable to hold him any longer, the chief stumbled and collapsed by a deep, communal well, the stone rim cool against his fevered skin. His vision blurred, spotted with black dots. A farmer's wife, Nana Ya, her own face lined with worry and hard work, was there drawing water with a tired, practiced motion. She saw the pitiful, skeletal figure, and her heart, though weary and heavy from her own struggles, softened with the compassion that was her nature. She did not recognize the former chief in this emaciated, broken, hollow-eyed beggar. She offered him a full, cool calabash of clear, life-giving water. As he drank, the water soothed his parched throat, and something deep inside him, something long frozen, broke open. Tears, hot, shameful, and entirely unbidden, began to stream down his face, mixing with the water on his chin, dripping onto his ragged tunic. He was not crying for his lost gold or his empty barns. He was weeping for a sudden, piercing, agonizingly clear memory, the gentle, loving, trusting eyes of his daughter, Efua, eyes that had always looked at him with pure adoration, which he had extinguished, crushed with his own cruel, prideful words. That night he slept fitfully under a scraggly, leafless mango tree, and in his fevered dreams he saw Efua calling to him through a thick, choking, black smoke, her hand outstretched, her voice a desperate, pleading echo he could not quite make out, a ghost from a past he had tried to murder. Driven by a final, desperate, flickering spark of hope, the chief decided to travel to the distant, rumored town of Koforidua, where he heard there was backbreaking work on a railway construction site, work that paid in meager handfuls of grain. The journey was far too much for his starved, weakened, aged body. The sun was a merciless, glaring enemy in a bleached white sky. His legs turned to water, his head spun, and the world dissolved into a dizzying, nauseating haze of heat and pain. He stumbled on a loose, sharp stone and fell, collapsing face down in the deep, choking dust of the lonely, deserted roadside, the fine powder filling his mouth and nose. People passed by on overloaded carts and on weary, stumbling foot. Some glanced at him with a moment's fleeting pity, but most looked away, hardened, seeing just another anonymous victim of the great, indifferent famine, another body soon to be food for the vultures. He felt the welcoming darkness closing in, a soft, cool, final end to his suffering and shame. Just as he surrendered to it, his mind letting go, he heard the slow, tired creak of wooden wheels and the soft, snuffling sound of a donkey. A shadow fell over him, blocking the harsh, punishing sun, bringing a moment of blessed coolness. Strong, capable, surprisingly gentle hands lifted him from the ground as if he were a child, and he knew no more, falling into a deep, dreamless void. He woke, much later, to the strange, clean smell of antiseptic and starched, sun-dried linen. He was lying on a simple but comfortable cot in a clean, whitewashed room, a thin sheet covering him. A kind-faced, plump nurse in a crisp, blue-and-white uniform was checking his forehead for fever, her touch cool and professional. Where am I?" he croaked, his voice a dry, painful rasp, his throat feeling as if it were lined with sandpaper. "You are in the Achim Mission Hospital," she said softly, her voice a calm, soothing balm. "You are safe now. You are very dehydrated, very weak. You must rest, old father. Your body needs time to heal." He tried to sit up, a familiar panic flaring in his chest, the panic of a man with nothing. "I have no money. Nothing. I cannot pay for this. For any of this." The nurse smiled a gentle, mysterious, knowing smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Do not trouble yourself with that now, old father. Do not let it weigh on your mind. Your bed, your medicine, your food, it has all been taken care of. All of it. You owe nothing." The chief frowned, his mind reeling in confusion and a deep, unsettling disbelief. Who in this wide, cruel, hungry world would pay for a destitute, prideful, and broken old man like him? He was a stranger here, a man with no name, no family, nothing. The mystery settled over him like a heavy, yet strangely comforting, cloak of unearned grace, a puzzle that nagged at him as he drifted back into a troubled sleep. Days turned into a week, a slow, measured passage of time marked by the ringing of a mission bell and the quiet comings and goings of the nurses. The chief slowly grew stronger, his body nourished by regular, simple, but life-restoring meals of porridge and broth. He spent his waking hours sitting in a hardback chair by the large, open window, watching the daily life of the hospital compound unfold like a silent play. One quiet, sun-drenched afternoon, a familiar, comforting sound drifted to his ears, cutting through the distant cries of market vendors, the steady, rhythmic, metallic clang, clang of a blacksmith's hammer on hot iron. He looked out, squinting against the bright light, and saw a man at the far end of the dusty yard, repairing the heavy, wrought iron hinges of the main gate, which had sagged on their posts. The man's back was turned, his shoulders were broad and powerful, his skin gleaming with sweat, his muscles flexing and bunching with each precise, confident, powerful strike. There was something in the set of his shoulders, a quiet strength and a fluid grace, that tugged at a deep, dusty, almost forgotten memory in the chief's mind. But the memory, blurred by time and shame, would not surface, would not take form. He simply watched, mesmerized and soothed by the honest, purposeful, ancient sound of hard, skilled work, a sound he had once scorned and despised because it was not accompanied by the soft, clinking music of gold coins or the rustle of paper money. The nurse came in with his evening meal, a bowl of light, savory porridge. She had a knowing, almost playful, secretive look in her eye, a sparkle that had not been there before. "The woman who paid your bill," she began casually, and the chief's heart leaped into his throat, pounding a wild, frantic rhythm against his ribs. "She came again today, just before the midday heat. She left a message for you, specifically for you." He leaned forward, his hands gripping the worn wooden arms of the chair, his knuckles white with sudden, desperate tension. What did she say? For God's sake, what is her name?" The nurse placed a calm, steadying hand on his thin, trembling arm. "She did not give a name. She was veiled quiet, but she told me to tell you this, and she was very clear that these were her exact words. A heart that knows how to love cannot hate forever, no matter how deep the wound, no matter how sharp the betrayal. The words, simple, profound, and utterly devastating, struck Chief Barima with the physical force of a sledgehammer. He gasped a ragged, painful intake of breath falling back against the chair as if all the air had been violently punched from his lungs, the world swimming before his eyes. Only one person in the entire, vast world could have spoken those words, could have possessed that particular, merciful wisdom. Only one person he had wounded so deeply, so completely. Efua, he whispered, the forbidden name, the name he had sworn never to utter again, now tasting like both the sweetest, most precious honey and the most bitter, corrosive poison on his tongue, a name that was his salvation and his condemnation. A new energy, born of shame and desperate hope, filled the chief's frail body. The moment the doctor released him, he set out, refusing a cart. He asked for directions to the riverside village, following the path his daughter had taken into exile. The journey was long, his body ached, but a fire of purpose burned within him. In the villages he passed, people pointed and whispered, "Is that not Chief Barima of Adumisa? The great chief has become a beggar." He heard their words, but for the first time, he felt no anger. He accepted their judgment, his head bowed in humility. He was no longer a chief on a golden stool. He was a penitent pilgrim on a dusty road, seeking a forgiveness he knew he did not deserve. He reached Akim as the sun began to set. He asked the young girl where to find Efua, the basket weaver. The child pointed toward the river, and there she was, sitting on a smooth stone, surrounded by children, was his daughter. She was telling a story, her face alight with kindness. She looked up, and her eyes met his. The smile vanished, replaced by stunned shock. Chief Barima felt his legs buckle. He crumpled to his knees in the soft earth. His voice was a broken sob. "My child, I cast you out. I was a proud, blind fool, but you saved my life. You, whom I called nothing, were my savior when I had nothing." Efua stood slowly, her entire body trembling. Efua took a slow step toward the man groveling in the dirt. The children, sensing the adult sorrow, slipped away. She looked down at him. "Father," she said, her voice clear. "Forgiveness is not just words you speak when you are in need. It is a choice you make every day. It is remembering the hurt without letting bitterness poison your soul." She turned and walked to the river's edge. She filled a calabash with cool water and carried it back to him. She knelt, her dress soaking in the mud, and offered the water. As he drank, it felt like the first wave of a great healing, washing away the layers of pride. A long shadow fell over them. Kojo stood there, having returned from his work. He was silent, his arms crossed. The chief stared at the ground. "You," the chief whispered hoarsely. "The poor blacksmith I despised. You became a true son, while I saw only shame." Kojo's expression softened. He knelt beside his wife. "It was not I who paid your hospital bill, Chief Barima," Kojo said gently. "It was your daughter. Efua saved every coin she earned from her baskets for a full year to pay your debt. She insisted." The chief looked up, his eyes wide with a fresh, staggering shock. The depth of her kindness was a bottomless well. Efua looked from her husband to her father. "There is more, father," she said softly. "Kojo, tell him." Kojo took a deep breath. "When a famine was at its worst, and we heard you were starving, I could not let the father of my wife die. I sent sacks of cassava and corn to your house with Alma. We made her swear never to tell you where it came from." This final revelation shattered the last of the chief's defenses. A great, racking sob tore from him. "Even when I cursed your name," he wept, "you were keeping me alive. You fed me with the very hands I had rejected." The full weight of their mercy crushed the last remnants of his pride into dust. As the three of them sat by the river, a single drop of rain landed on the chief's hand. Then another. A gentle, steady rain began to fall, the first in 3 long years. It was a soft, soaking shower that kissed the parched earth. Villagers emerged, lifting their faces to the sky, laughing and crying with relief. The drought was over. To Chief Barima, the rain felt like a divine blessing, a sign that the land was being washed clean, just as his own heart was being cleansed by his daughter's forgiveness. That night, Efua prepared a simple feast. She cooked a large pot of groundnut soup and a mountain of banku. But this feast was not just for their family. They invited the poorest families in Akim. Kojo's forge glowed with a joyous light. Chief Barima sat on a low stool among the fishermen and farmers. He ate from a common bowl, his hands sharing food with those he would have once considered beneath him. He had no golden stool and commanded no servants, but for the first time in years, he felt a profound, genuine peace settle in his soul. The next morning, the chief called Kojo and Efua to him. He looked older, but his eyes were clear. He slowly twisted his heavy, ancestral gold ring from his finger. He took Kojo's hand, the hand that was calloused from honest labor, and pressed the ring into his palm. "Take this," he said. "It is the last of my wealth. Let remind you that gold is nothing without a good and generous heart to give it true value." It was not merely a gift of metal. It was a symbolic passing of wisdom, a surrender of his old world. The story spread from village to village like the welcome rains. It became a legend, a tale told by elders to teach the young about the dangers of pride. At every gathering, storytellers would recount how Chief Barima lost all his riches only to find his soul at his daughter's doorstep. They would always end with the same proverb: "The river forgives, for it must flow, but it never forgets its source." Efua's act of unconditional love had become a lesson for all generations, a story that would never be forgotten. In the peaceful years that followed, the chief spent his old age by Kojo's forge. He would watch the sparks fly upward like stars against the evening sky. One evening, as Kojo worked a piece of iron, the old man spoke softly. "I understand now," he murmured. "The hottest fire does not destroy strong iron. It only purifies it, making it stronger and more useful." Kojo smiled, the firelight dancing in his eyes. The narrator's voice closes the tale. "So remember, pride may build high walls, but it is love that builds the bridges across them."